Welcome to the Book Nook. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like it's engineering or something.
Exactly. It's binary. You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, broken or not broken.
And it's comforting in a way. I mean, we like things to be visible. We want our problems neatly categorized so we can just apply a standard fix.
But then you step into the world of personal finance, wealth building, planning for your future, and suddenly that pristine X-ray machine is it's completely shattered. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape of our own bank accounts, our own careers, that is incredibly murky.
Oh, totally.
Society tells us there is a formula, a very clean, straightforward X-ray of how to succeed in life. But for most of you listening, for most people, the bones are still breaking, we're in pain, and the traditional diagnosis just isn't making sense of it.
Because we are operating on a financial anatomy that most of us were never actually taught how to read. We're given a map of a city that hasn't existed for 50 years, and then we're told it's our own fault when we end up hopelessly lost.
Which brings us straight into the core of today's deep dive. We are unpacking a perspective on money, work, and education that forces you to look at that murky financial X-ray through a completely different light box. We are digging into the core philosophies of Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert T. Kiyosaki with Sharon Lechter. And the entry point for this entire discussion isn't some high-level Wall Street theory.
No, it starts at a kitchen table.
Yeah, with a very frustrated teenager.
Such a relatable moment, too.
It is brutally relatable. In the introduction, Sharon Lechter sets the stage. She is an accountant. Her husband is a patent attorney. They are essentially the absolute poster children for what she calls the master plan.
You know the plan. It's the societal blueprint we've all had drilled into our heads.
Right. Go to school, get straight A's, find a safe, secure job with a pension and great medical benefits, and you will just ride off into a comfortable sunset.
It's the advice handed down from generation to generation since, well, the dawn of the industrial age. And it worked for a specific window of time in a very specific economic climate.
But the spark for this entire exploration happens when Lechter's son comes home from school totally disillusioned. He's exhausted, he's bored, and he asks this devastatingly simple question. He says, why should I put time into studying subjects I will never use in real life?
And she gives the classic knee-jerk parental response.
Yeah, she tells him that if he doesn't get good grades, he won't get into a good college, and without that, he won't get a good job.
But the son's response to that is what shatters the illusion. He essentially tells his mother to wake up. I mean, he points out that the richest, most successful people in the world, and he uses figures like Bill Gates, Michael Jordan, they didn't reach the pinnacle of wealth and influence because they got a gold star in high school history or strictly followed a traditional educational path.
Right, which creates this terrifying moment of clarity for Lechter. She's standing there, a highly educated professional, realizing she is giving her son the exact same advice her parents gave her, but the world has fundamentally mutated.
Downsizing is rampant. Job security is becoming a complete myth.
Exactly. College graduates are earning less in real purchasing power, and relying on pensions or Social Security is starting to feel like playing roulette. The master plan is broken.
It's a recipe for a life of quiet desperation. If you follow an industrial age blueprint in an information age economy, you're going to struggle. And that is the mission of our discussion today. We are going to unpack the core lessons Robert Kiyosaki learned from the two most important men in his life, his two dads, to help you completely rewire how you think about working, earning, and living. We need to build a new diagnostic tool.
To do that, we have to travel back in time to Hawaii in the 1950s. We're setting the scene with a 9-year-old Robert navigating the deeply conflicting advice of these two immense father figures. This tale of two dads is such a brilliant narrative device because it takes abstract financial theory and turns it into a living, breathing clash of mindsets.
The contrast between these two men is really the foundation of everything. On one side, you have Robert's biological father, who he refers to as his poor dad. Now, we have to clarify something immediately. Poor in this context is a mindset, a behavioral pattern, not necessarily an initial income bracket.
Right. He wasn't destitute.
Not at all. This man was highly educated. He had a PhD. He finished his undergraduate work in less than 2 years. He went to Stanford, the University of Chicago Northwestern. He rose to become the superintendent of education for the state of Hawaii. He was a prominent, highly visible government bureaucrat.
By all societal metrics, he was a massive success, but he struggled financially his entire life. There was always, too much month at the end of the money.
Yeah.
On the other side, you have his best friend, Mike's father, who Robert calls his rich dad. This man never even finished the 8th grade. He was a self-made capitalist, an entrepreneur building local businesses, who eventually became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii.
And both men were incredibly hardworking. Both men had tremendous respect for education. But they recommended completely different courses of study. Poor dad said, study hard so you can find a good company to work for. Rich dad said, study hard so you can find a good company to buy.
That linguistic difference is where I want to set up camp for a minute. The text makes such a point about the specific phrases each dad used and how those phrases literally construct reality. Poor dad would say, the love of money is the root of all evil. Rich dad would counter with, the lack of money is the root of all evil.
It comes down to neurolinguistics. The words we use repeatedly don't just describe our world, they build the boundaries of what we believe is possible.
Let's dig into the most famous example from the text, because it's something I think almost every listener has said this week. Poor dad constantly used the phrase, I can't afford it. If young Robert wanted a new baseball glove or a toy, the answer was a heavy sigh and, I can't afford it.
A statement of fact in his eyes.
Right. But Rich Dad absolutely forbade those words in his house. He insisted on replacing that statement with a question. He said to ask, how can I afford it?
That single shift in phrasing is the first major dividing line between the two mindsets.
I want to push back on this, though. Using the logic most of us grew up with. Isn't saying I can't afford it just being a financially responsible adult?
Well, let's unpack that.
Because if I look at my bank account and I have $1,000 and I see a car that costs $50,000, saying I can't afford it is just stating a mathematical, factual reality. It's living within your means. But the text frames it as a sign of profound mental laziness. The book compares it to sitting on the couch instead of taking your brain to the gym. I struggle with this. How does simply asking, how can I afford it, actually change the reality of my empty bank account?
It doesn't change the bank account in that exact second, but it completely changes the trajectory of your behavior. Let's look at the mechanics of what happens in your brain. When you declare, I can't afford it, your brain essentially powers down. It's a statement of finality. It lets you off the hook.
So it's over.
Exactly. You might feel a momentary pang of sadness, maybe some self-pity or helplessness, but then you accept the limitation and you move on. The problem is closed.
So it's like putting a cast on a broken arm but never taking it off. The muscle just atrophies underneath because it never has to do any work.
That's a perfect analogy. The brain is the most powerful computer in the world, and Rich Dad believed that if you don't challenge it, it weakens. When you ask, how can I afford it, you refuse to accept the closed door. You are throwing down a gauntlet to your own subconscious. You force your brain to engage, to look for alternatives, to spot opportunities it would have otherwise ignored.
Wait, so he wasn't saying you should go to the dealership and finance the $50,000 car with debt you can't pay?
No, absolutely not. He was saying the process of figuring out how you could generate the capital to afford it is what forces you to think like an entrepreneur. Maybe it sparks an idea for a side business. Maybe it forces you to reevaluate your current investments. It creates a dynamic spirit. Poor Dad's statement leads to despondency. Rich Dad's question leads to innovation. He firmly believed that our thoughts materialize into our circumstances.
Which explains why Rich Dad fiercely called himself a witch man, even when he was completely devastatingly broke after a major financial setback. There's this incredible detail where he's lost everything. He still refuses to speak of himself as poor. He tells the boys there is a difference between being poor and being broke. Broke is temporary and poor is eternal.
He refused to internalize poverty as an identity. Your bank account can be empty, but if your mindset remains wealthy, you will find a way to fill it back up.
And this mindset shift wasn't just a philosophical debate for young Robert. It got very real, very fast. At 9 years old, Robert and Mike got tired of being the poor kids at a school populated by the children of wealthy plantation owners. They went to Rich Dad and explicitly asked him to teach them how to make money. That request kicks off lesson 1. The rich don't work for money.
And Rich Dad's pedagogical method is unconventional, to say the least.
It is brutal. It's the 10 cents an hour story. I mean, Robert and Mike asked to be taught. Rich Dad agrees, but he says he won't teach them classroom style. He puts them to work in one of his convenience stores. Their job is to dust the canned goods on the shelves for 3 hours every single Saturday. And he pays them 10 cents an hour.
Which is nothing.
Even in the mid-1950s, 30 cents for a morning's work was an absolute pittance. Young Robert is missing his Little League games, he's breathing in dust, he's sweating in the Hawaiian heat, and after a few weeks, he hits his breaking point. He feels completely exploited. He marches into Rich Dad's office, ready to quit, demanding a raise, and complaining that he hasn't been taught a single thing about getting rich.
He sounds exactly like a disgruntled employee demanding better terms from the union boss. And Rich Dad's just sitting there behind his desk, highly amused by the whole thing. He looks at this angry 9-year-old and says, "In less than a month, you sound like most of my employees."
Robert is yelling, "You haven't taught me anything, you're just cheap." And Rich Dad delivers this paradigm-shifting definition of learning. He says, does teaching mean talking or a lecture? That's how schools teach. Life teaches you by pushing you around. Every time life pushes you, it's saying, wake up, there's something I want you to learn.
He was pushing the boys to see if they would just complain about the low pay and ask for a few more pennies, or if they would get angry enough to look for a completely different system.
Right. And to see if they were ready, he puts them through the melting ice cream test. This scene is just a masterclass in psychological pressure. Rich Dad meets the boys at a local park. He buys them ice cream, and he tells them that if they want to learn the real lesson, they have to agree to work at the store for nothing. 0 cents an hour.
The boys are stunned.
Dust in cans for free. Then Rich Dad starts turning the screws. He tests the resolve. He says, okay, how about 25 cents an hour? The boy's eyes widen. Then he escalates. How about $1 an hour?
Which, for a kid in that era, is unimaginable wealth.
Finally, he offers them an exorbitant $2 an hour. And the imagery in the text is so vivid. Robert describes sitting on the park bench, staring at Rich Dad. The ice cream is melting, running down their hands. The ants are starting to eat the sweet drops off the ground, and their brains are absolutely overheating. They are fighting this massive, primal, emotional temptation to just scream yes and take the money.
I know you had a visceral reaction to this part of the text when we were prepping.
I really did.
Yeah.
I just have to ask, why put kids through this kind of torture? Rich Dad says he's giving them a taste of life, but from the outside, isn't a wealthy businessman essentially just exploiting child labor to prove a philosophical point? He could just draw them a diagram. It feels a little cruel.
It borders on cruelty. And Rich Dad even acknowledges the harshness of it. But he explains that it was a highly deliberate, necessary simulation. If he just drew a diagram, they would memorize it for a test and forget it. By offering them exorbitant money and then taking it away completely, he was forcing them to experience and then detach from the two profound emotions that dictate almost every financial decision a human being makes: fear and desire, or greed.
We need to unpack the mechanics of fear and desire because this is the psychological engine of the entire book.
Okay, let's start with fear. It's the baseline emotion. It's the primal terror of not having enough money to survive. It's the panic that jolts an adult awake at 3 a.m., sweating, wondering how they're going to pay the mortgage or the medical bills. That intense fear forces them to get out of bed and go to a job they might hate. They trade their time for a paycheck to temporarily soothe that fear.
Okay, so the fear gets them to the office. Then what?
Then they receive the paycheck. The fear subsides for a moment, and the second emotion immediately takes over: desire, or greed. They look at the money, and they start imagining all the things that money can acquire: a newer car, a vacation, a bigger television, dinner at a nicer restaurant. They desire the comfort and status that money provides. So they increase their spending to match their new income.
Which drains the bank account.
Precisely. Which brings the fear rushing back.
Yeah.
So they work harder, hoping for a raise. They get the raise, the desire kicks in, they upgrade their lifestyle again. This creates a perpetual loop. This is the core concept of the rat race. It is an endless, exhausting cycle of waking up, going to work, and paying bills, entirely driven by emotional reactions rather than logical financial strategy.
The book illustrates this trap with this incredible metaphor of the donkey and the carrot. You have an owner driving a cart, and he's dangling a carrot on a stick just in front of the donkey's nose. The donkey is running furiously, putting in massive effort, believing with every step that it's finally going to catch this carrot. But it never does. All it is actually doing is pulling the owner's heavy cart wherever the owner wants to go.
And the tragic part is the donkey is completely blind to the reality of the harness, the cart, and the owner. Tomorrow, the owner will just bring a fresh carrot, and the donkey will run again.
Wow.
For the vast majority of people, the paycheck is the carrot. It is an illusion of progress. You think you're getting ahead, but you're just pulling the bank's cart and the government's cart. Rich Dad wanted these 9-year-old boys to see the trap early so they could avoid it. He wanted them to learn to think in spite of their emotions, rather than reacting with their emotions. By forcing them to work for 0 cents an hour, he removed the carrot entirely. He forced them to look at the whole picture, the whole store, not just the coins being dangled in front of their noses.
And the simulation actually worked. Because they were working for free and they weren't hyper-fixated on earning their 10 cents, their perspective broadened. They noticed an opportunity they would have completely ignored otherwise.
Oh, the comic books.
Yes. While dusting the store, they saw the manager, Mrs. Martin, cutting the top halves of the covers off the comic books and throwing the rest of the book away. When the distributor came to swap out the old comics for the new ones, he only took the top halves of the covers as proof they hadn't sold. The distributor told the boys they could keep the old coverless comics as long as they didn't try to sell them.
They recognized an asset sitting in the trash.
Mm.
What did they do with it?
They built a mini empire. They took a spare room in Mike's basement and stacked it with hundreds of these salvaged comic books. They created a comic book library. They charged the neighborhood kids 10 cents for admission, and for that dime, a kid could sit in the basement and read as many comics as they wanted in 2 hours. It was a massive value for the kids, who could normally only buy one comic for a dime.
It's brilliant arbitrage.
It really is. They hired Mike's younger sister to be the librarian, taking a cut of the profits, and suddenly, Robert and Mike were clearing $9.50 a week. In the 1950s, for two 9-year-olds, that was staggering money.
This is the profound aha moment of Lesson 1. By solving the problem of not getting paid, they created a business system that generated money even when they were sitting in a classroom or playing baseball. They had successfully stopped working for money, and they had figured out how to make a system and other people's labor work for them. They had avoided the trap of the rat race.
It's an incredible story, but, avoiding the rat race as an adult requires a lot more than just a clever hustle like a basement library. As life gets more complex, it requires a fundamental, rock-solid understanding of what money actually is and how it flows. You have to be able to read the financial X-ray we talked about at the beginning. And that brings us to Lesson 2, the foundation of financial literacy.
This lesson is the absolute bedrock of the book, and it's built on one singular, unbreakable rule. Kiyosaki says it is rule number 1, and truthfully, it is the only rule. You must know the difference between an asset and a liability, and you must spend your life buying assets.
Honestly, when you hear it phrased like that, it sounds almost insulting. It sounds too simple.
It does. But Rich Dad heavily utilized the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. He knew that accounting, traditionally taught, can be the most mind-numbingly boring, confusing subject on earth. It's a language of jargon. So, to teach 2 kids, he threw out the jargon. He didn't use numbers at first, he just drew pictures. Simple boxes and arrows showing the flow of cash.
He drew an income statement, which is just money coming in, like income, and money going out, which are expenses. And below that, he drew a balance sheet, which lists assets on one side and liabilities on the other. And his definitions for these terms are what completely broke my brain the first time I encountered this text. If you look in a dictionary, or if you ask a traditional CPA, an asset is something you own that has value. But Rich Dad threw the dictionary out the window. His definition is entirely based on cash flow. He said an asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket, period. End of discussion.
Because cash flow determines the truth of the item. It doesn't matter what it's worth on paper. It only matters what it does to your pocket on a monthly basis.
I have to construct an analogy here to make this visceral because just talking about boxes and arrows can get dry. Imagine your financial life as a plumbing system. Your income is the main water line flowing into your house. Your living expenses, food, gas, electricity, are the drains where the water flows out.
I like this. Keep going.
In this plumbing system, a liability is a massive leak. It's a cracked pipe that constantly drips water out of your system no matter what you do. You have to keep working harder to pump more water in just to keep the pressure up. But an asset is a reservoir sitting above your house, catching rainwater, and pumping new, additional water into your main line, completely independent of your own labor. Rich Dad is saying, spend all your time building reservoirs and stop installing leaky pipes.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it, and it perfectly sets up the most controversial application of this rule in the entire book.
Yes. Here's where I have to violently push back, and I'm going to adopt Poor Dad's logic entirely because it is so deeply culturally ingrained in the American psyche. The book claims, very explicitly, that your house, your primary residence, is not an asset, it is a liability.
Oh yeah, this makes people so mad.
But everyone, from our parents to our bankers to our real estate agents, teaches us that a home is our greatest investment. The entire concept of the American dream is built on the foundation of home ownership. How on earth can this book argue against the American dream and tell me my house is a leaky pipe?
It is the single point in the book that causes the most intense emotional resistance. People get furious when they read it.
Hmm.
But to understand the logic, we have to trace the actual real-world cash flow patterns that Kiyosaki maps out for a typical middle-class person.
Okay, let's follow the water through the pipes.
You graduate, you get a job, the income flows in. The very first thing that happens is a massive leak. You can't control taxes. The government takes its cut before the money even reaches your hands. Then you pay your basic living expenses, rent, food, transport. Now let's say you do well. You get a promotion. You get a raise. You feel successful. You decide it's time to achieve the American dream. So you buy a house. What just happened on your balance sheet?
I added a massive 30-year mortgage to my liabilities column.
Exactly. And what happens to your daily cash flow? That massive liability, the mortgage, now generates a cascade of new permanent expenses. You have property taxes, which can go up. You have homeowners insurance. You have maintenance, a new roof, a broken water heater, lawn care, higher utility bills. The money flows out of your pocket every single month to sustain the house. By Rich Dad's strict mathematical definition, because the house mandates that money leaves your pocket, it is a liability. It is a giant leak.
The book paints this terrifying picture. It calls it a moving picture show of the young couple trapped by their own success. They make more money, but because inflation is a reality, their purchasing power barely increases.
This brings up a critical concept from the tax bracket creep.
Right. Let's define that, because it's insidious. You get a 5% raise at work, which feels great. But inflation is running at 5%, so you haven't actually gained any real purchasing power. Things just cost more. However, that higher gross dollar amount on your paycheck pushes you into a higher tax bracket. So the government takes a larger percentage of your money, you actually end up taking home less real value despite the raise.
And how does the couple react to the stress of this hidden squeeze?
They decide they need a bigger house or a nicer car to feel like they are succeeding. So they increase their liabilities again, they max out credit cards to buy furniture for the bigger house. Suddenly, they are absolutely drowning in monthly payments. So what happens? The bank calls and offers a lifeline, a bill consolidation loan against the equity in their home. The bank says, pay off all those high-interest credit cards and just make one low, easy payment to us. The couple signs the papers, they pay off the cards, and they breathe a sigh of relief.
But it's an illusion of relief. What they just did was roll short-term, unsecured consumer debt into a 30-year mortgage secured by their home. They didn't solve the cash flow problem. They just stretched it out over 3 decades and put their roof at risk. They are completely trapped in the rat race.
Kiyosaki outlines 3 specific devastating losses when you pour all your early wealth into a house instead of investing in actual income-producing assets. First is the loss of time. While your money is tied up in home equity, it is completely illiquid. It's not out in the market growing and compounding. Second is the loss of capital. That's the money you're bleeding out on maintenance, interest, and property taxes capital that could have been used to acquire real assets.
But the third loss is the one that really stunts a person's growth, the loss of investment education.
Exactly. Because you pour every spare dime into the mortgage, and whatever is left goes into a highly managed, completely passive 401k, you never actually learn how to be a sophisticated investor. You never evaluate a business. You never analyze a piece of rental real estate. You never get the reps in. You just play it safe and cross your fingers that the stock market goes up.
This is why the book introduces a fascinating philosophical concept borrowed from Japanese culture: the power of the sword, the jewel, and the mirror. Historically, the sword represents the power of weapons or military might. The jewel represents the power of money. But the third and most important power is the mirror, the power of self-knowledge and truth.
So how does the mirror apply to the American dream of buying a house?
Well, we have to be willing to look in the mirror and ask ourselves the hard, uncomfortable questions. We have to look at our own cash flow and ask, does this actually make sense? The fear of ostracism, the fear of not keeping up with the Joneses, it causes people to conform rather than question. It's easier to just follow the crowd's dogma that a house is always an asset or that a consolidation loan is always a smart move. The mirror forces you to break the illusion. It forces you to admit that your house is taking money out of your pocket, and therefore, you need to build reservoirs elsewhere to fund it.
So if you spend your life actively using that mirror, questioning the societal dogma, and strictly buying true assets, things that put cash in your pocket without your physical labor, you are, in Rich Dad's vocabulary, minding your own business. Which brings us to lesson 3 and a truly fascinating story about hamburgers.
Ah, the Ray Kroc story. It perfectly encapsulates this mindset.
Yes. So, Ray Kroc, the man who took McDonald's from a small operation to a global empire, was giving a guest lecture to an MBA class at the University of Texas. It's a great session, and afterwards they all go down to a local bar to have some beers. Ray looks around the table and asks the MBA students, who can tell me what business I am in.
And the students all laugh, assuming he's setting up a
All
joke.
right. Eventually, one of them says, Ray, everyone knows you're in the hamburger business. And Ray stops and then says, No, I am not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate.
It is a profound paradigm shift. Ray Kroc knew that the primary day-to-day focus of the company was selling franchises and ensuring a consistent hamburger. But he never lost sight of the fact that the person buying the franchise was also paying for the lease on the land under the restaurant. He was using the hamburger business to buy the most valuable intersections in the world. Today, McDonald's is one of the largest single owners of real estate on the planet.
So how do we translate the Ray Kroc mindset to the listener's life? We aren't all building fast food empires. How do we apply this?
It requires dissecting the fundamental distinction between your profession and your business. The industrial age school system trains you to become what you study. If you study law, you become a lawyer. If you study auto mechanics, you become a mechanic. The trap is that you become entirely focused on your income column. You spend your life working for the owners of the company, working for the government by paying taxes, and working for the bank by paying your mortgage. Your profession pays the bills, but your profession is not your business.
If you ask a banker what their business is, they'll say, I'm a banker. But they don't own the bank. They just work there. They are confusing their profession with the business.
Exactly. To succeed financially, to truly exit the rat race and build lasting wealth, you must shift your focus to your asset column. That is your true business. You keep your daytime job. You be a fantastic employee. You earn your salary. But you mind your own business by using whatever excess capital you have to acquire assets.
And the text gives a very specific, actionable list of what constitutes a real asset. We are talking about businesses that run without your daily presence. If you own a bakery, but you have to be there at 4 a.m. every day to bake the bread, you don't own a business, you own a job. An asset is a system that runs itself. We are also talking about stocks, bonds, and income-generating real estate.
The text also mentions notes, or IOUs.
Let's explain that because it's less common. This essentially means you act as the bank. You lend money to someone, perhaps for a real estate deal, and they pay you back with interest. The piece of paper, the note, is the asset because it generates a monthly cash flow into your pocket.
And finally, intellectual property. Royalties from music you wrote, scripts you authored, patents you filed, anything that has value, produces income, or appreciates, and has a ready market where it can be liquidated if necessary. You patiently build that asset column, adding one reservoir at a time until the cash flow from those assets exceeds your monthly living expenses. At that exact mathematical moment, you are financially independent.
It's a beautiful concept, but of course, once you start building this asset column and the cash starts flowing, you quickly realize there is a massive, incredibly powerful entity that wants to take a huge piece of it.
The government.
Exactly. Which means if you want to keep what you build, you have to understand the rules the wealthy play by. This takes us to lesson 4, the history of taxes and the power of corporations. And I have to say, this part of the book is fascinating because it completely shatters the Robin Hood myth we are all taught in civics class.
It really does. Rich Dad fashioned himself as an expert on the history of taxes. He explained to the boys that initially, in both England and America, there were no permanent income taxes.
Yeah.
Taxes were only levied temporarily to pay for specific crises, like wars. But eventually, as the government grew, it needed a steady, permanent stream of income. So how did the politicians sell the idea of a permanent income tax to a public that hated taxes?
They used the oldest narrative in the book, Robin Hood. They told the poor and the burgeoning middle class, don't worry, this tax isn't for you. We are only going to tax the ultra-rich industrialists. We are going to take from the rich and redistribute it to build infrastructure for everyone else. And the masses, driven by a bit of envy and a desire for fairness, cheered and voted the tax laws in. The tax was initially designed explicitly to punish the wealthy.
But here is the tragic historical irony that Kiyosaki points out. Once the government bureaucracy got a taste of that money, its appetite grew exponentially. A bureaucracy's nature is to expand, and expansion requires more capital. Soon, taxing just the ultra-wealthy wasn't enough to cover the bills. So the tax brackets started trickling down, and eventually the taxes grew to heavily punish the very people who voted for them, the middle class.
The wealthy, however, are not victims. Because they possess financial intelligence, they didn't just sit there and let their wealth be confiscated. They understood the tax code, and they outsmarted the intellectuals who wrote the laws. They utilized a legal structure that had been around for centuries, long before income tax, the corporation.
To understand why this works, we have to remember where corporations came from. Back in the days of sailing ships, wealthy investors wanted to fund voyages to the New World or Asia to bring back spices and silk. But the oceans were incredibly dangerous. A ship could easily sink or be taken by pirates. The investors didn't want to risk their entire personal fortune on one storm, so they created a legal entity, a corporation. They put a specific amount of money into the corporation to finance the voyage. If the ship was lost, they only lost the money they invested in that specific corporation, not everything else they owned. It was a shield.
And today, people have this misconception that a corporation has to be a massive glass skyscraper with a glowing logo on it and thousands of employees. The book explicitly clarifies this. A corporation is literally just a file folder with some legal documents sitting in a filing cabinet in an attorney's office. It is a legal fiction, but that file folder offers immense legal protection from lawsuits, and crucially, it offers a totally different set of tax rules.
This is the secret playbook of the rich. We have to look at the mechanics of the formula. If you operate as a normal employee, the formula dictated by the government is you earn your money, you get taxed on that income immediately, and you try to spend whatever's left to live your life. The government gets fed first.
But if you operate your assets through a corporation, the formula is entirely reversed. The formula becomes the corporation earns money, it spends all of its legitimate business expenses pre-tax, which can include portions of car payments, travel, health insurance, sometimes even meals if done correctly, and then it gets taxed only on whatever profit is left over. It's a massive, entirely legal advantage.
The employee pays taxes on their gross income. The corporation pays taxes on its net income. It is the difference between walking and flying. But to pilot that plane, to utilize these structures effectively, you need a high financial IQ.
And Rich Dad breaks down financial IQ into 4 specific foundational pillars. It's not just one skill. It's the synergy of these 4 things that creates true wealth.
Pillar 1 is accounting. This is basic financial literacy. It's the ability to read the numbers, to look at an income statement and balance sheet, and understand the story the cash flow is telling you. It's the analytical, left-brain, detail-oriented side of the operation. You have to know if a business is actually making money or just burning cash.
Pillar 2 is investing. This is the science of making money. This is the creative right brain side. It's about designing strategies, finding the angle, seeing the opportunity in a piece of real estate or a business that everyone else is walking past.
Pillar 3 is understanding markets. This is the science of supply and demand. You have to understand both the fundamental economic sense of an investment. Does this property make sense based on the rents in the area? And the technical, emotion-driven aspects of the market.
Okay, this is where I have to bring up the Tickle Me Elmo story from the book, because it is the absolute perfect, most hilarious example of understanding an emotion-driven market. For anyone who wasn't around or doesn't remember, back in 1996, the Tickle Me Elmo doll was the must-have toy for Christmas. The manufacturer, arguably deliberately, restricted the supply while pumping up massive television advertising. Parents went into an absolute panic. The supply was tiny, but the emotional demand was astronomical. So what happened? Savvy scalpers bought up the few dolls in the stores for $30 and then sold them in newspaper classifieds to desperate parents for hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars.
It's pure supply and demand economics driven entirely by human emotion and FOMO, fear of missing out.
Exactly. And Kiyosaki points out that this isn't just about toys. The exact same emotional panic, the exact same herd mentality happens in the stock market during a tech boom, or in the real estate market during a housing bubble. If you understand the market, you can see the Elmo craze happening in stocks and act accordingly.
And finally, pillar 4 is the law. This loops back to the corporation. It's knowing the tax advantages and the protections and lawsuits that legal structures provide. When you synthesize these 4 pillars, accounting, investing, markets, and the law, you develop a financial IQ so high that you have the courage to stop relying on a safe job. You could start actually inventing money.
Inventing money. That sounds like something you'd get investigated by the Secret Service for, which leads us perfectly into lessons 5 and 6, the rich invent money and working to learn.
It is a provocative, almost dangerous-sounding phrase, inventing money. But it gets to the very core of what holds most people back. Kiyosaki argues passionately that every single one of us has a financial genius inside of us. We are all capable of incredible creativity. But that genius is suppressed, locked away by self-doubt and excessive fear of making a mistake. The school system teaches us that making mistakes is bad, so we become terrified of trying anything new. But in the real world outside the classroom, it's very rarely the smart who get ahead. It is the bold.
He illustrates this with the story of Alexander Graham Bell, which is just mind-blowing. Bell invented the telephone, an earth-shattering technology, but he was completely overwhelmed by the business side of it. The demand was too high. He didn't have the infrastructure. So he goes to Western Union, which was the massive monopolistic telegraph giant of the time, and he offers to sell them his patent and his entire little company for $100,000.
A pittance for what it was.
And the president of Western Union scoffs at him. He tells Bell the price is ridiculous, that the telephone is essentially a toy, and he turns him down flat. So, forced into a corner, Bell keeps the patent, figures out the business side, AT&T is born, and the rest is multi-billion-dollar history. The president of Western Union was undoubtedly highly educated and smart, but he wasn't bold enough or visionary enough to see the future. He let his arrogance and his comfort with the status quo blind him to the greatest invention of the century.
Fear and comfort blind us to opportunities that are sitting right in front of us. To help people overcome this fear and to safely practice being bold, Kiyosaki invented a board game called Cash FEL Flow. The brilliance of the game is that it is designed to act as a mirror, giving instant, undeniable feedback on a player's actual financial behavior.
The story of the woman playing the game in one of his seminars is so incredibly telling. She's a professional, she comes to play the game, and during her turn, she draws a doodad card. Specifically, she draws a card that dictates she bought a new boat. Now, at first, she's thrilled. Yay, I got a boat! But then the mechanics of the game kick in. She has to do the accounting, she has to put the boat on her balance sheet as a liability, and she has to add the monthly maintenance and loan payments to her income statement. She watches in real time on the paper as the expenses of the boat crush her cash flow, pushing her further into debt and making it mathematically much harder to escape the rat race. And she gets visibly, genuinely angry at the game.
She gets angry because the game was forcing her to look at a reality she had spent her life avoiding.
Exactly. The truth comes out. She was recently divorced. And she realized through the mirror of the game that after 20 years of marriage, she and her ex-husband had accumulated a mountain of doodads. Boats, cars, expensive toys, huge houses, but they had zero actual cash-flowing assets. The game reflected her real-life embarrassment and deep-seated anger about her own lack of financial intelligence. It proved the point that if you don't have financial intelligence, giving you more money just exacerbates your existing behavioral flaws. You'll just buy bigger doodads and get into bigger debt.
Which ties directly into Lesson 6 work to learn, don't work for money. Because acquiring that financial intelligence, building those 4 pillars, often requires stepping far outside your comfort zone and intentionally learning skills you might consider beneath your current station in life.
This brings up what is honestly my absolute favorite interaction in the whole book, the Singapore reporter. The setup is great. Robert is doing a press tour in Singapore, and he sits down for an interview with a young, highly credentialed female journalist. She's smart, she's driven, and she tells him she wants to be a best-selling author. Robert looks at her previously published work and is genuinely impressed. He tells her, "You are a great writer. You have a master's degree in English literature. Your prose is fantastic. But if you want your books to sell, you need to learn how to sell." He suggests she go take a basic sales training course, maybe even get a job selling encyclopedias door to door just to learn the psychology of rejection and persuasion.
And she is deeply, profoundly offended by the suggestion.
She completely loses her mind. She starts aggressively packing her briefcase, furious that he would even suggest it. She says, "I have a master's degree in English literature. I am a professional journalist. I went to school specifically so I wouldn't have to be a slimy salesperson. I would never stoop so low as to learn how to sell." And Robert calmly points to the notes she wrote down on her legal pad at the start of the interview. He says, "Look at what you wrote. You wrote down that I am a best-selling author. Doesn't say best writing author. I'm actually a pretty terrible writer, but I know how to sell. You are a great writer, but you don't know how to sell. Combine the two, and you have magic."
It perfectly illustrates the fundamental clash between specialization and generalization. Poor Dad's advice was always to specialize. Get a PhD. Learn more and more about less and less. The goal of specialization is to become so deeply knowledgeable in one tiny niche that a large corporation or a university has to promote you within their specific hierarchy. But Rich Dad advised the exact opposite. Know a little about a lot. The reporter was highly specialized in writing, but because she lacked one crucial generalized skill sales, her income potential was severely capped.
The book calls this the hamburger paradox, and I use this analogy all the time now we're talking to creatives or entrepreneurs. Kiyosaki asks his seminar classes, how many of you can cook a better, tastier hamburger than McDonald's? Almost every single hand in the room goes up. But then he asks the follow-up. If you can cook a better burger, why does McDonald's make billions of dollars a year while you struggle to pay rent?
Because McDonald's is not in the business of making the bag hamburger. They have mastered the business system. They have mastered the real estate acquisition, the supply chain delivery, the national marketing, the standardized operations, the accounting. The talented cooks in the audience focus solely on the hamburger itself, completely ignoring the massive system required to actually monetize the hamburger at scale. Being just one basic skill away from great wealth, whether that's stepping back to learn sales, learning basic marketing, or learning how to read an income statement, is very often what separates the talented, hardworking poor from the incredibly wealthy.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are. We've established the mindsets. We have the strict definitions of assets and liabilities. We understand the power of corporate structures and the tax code. We know we need to generalize our skills and master systems. We have the map. The diagnostic X-ray is clear. But actually walking out the front door and executing the plan, that is terrifying because there are massive, deeply ingrained psychological roadblocks standing in the way.
Even people who read the book, understand the math, and possess high financial literacy often fail to execute. Kiyosaki identifies 5 specific, brutal obstacles that prevent people from building abundant asset columns. Let's break them down mechanically.
Obstacle number 1, fear. Specifically, the paralyzing fear of losing money.
Nobody likes losing money. Rich Dad admitted he hated losing money. But the difference is how you handle that fear. Rich Dad advised Robert to think like a Texan. What does that mean? Texans live big. When they win massively. But when they fail spectacularly. And crucially, they brag about the failure. They remember the Alamo. The Alamo was a devastating military defeat, a massacre. But the Texans didn't bury it. They used that failure as a rallying cry, a battle cry to inspire future victory. They used the pain of losing to fuel the effort to win.
Right, whereas most people let the fear of failure dictate their strategy. Losers avoid failing entirely, which mathematically means they avoid winning. The book argues that if you are absolutely terrified of losing a single dollar, you end up with a highly balanced, ultra-conservative portfolio.
Let's define what that looks like.
It's someone who puts all their money into CDs, certificates of deposit, where you lock your money in a bank for a tiny guaranteed interest rate that usually doesn't even keep up with inflation, or they buy low-yield government bonds. It feels incredibly safe, but it's completely stagnant. You are guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. It's playing the game not to lose, rather than playing the game to win.
Which brings us to obstacle number 2, cynicism, also known as the Chicken Little syndrome, where the sky is always falling.
Oh man, we all have a Chicken Little in our own heads, and we all have friends who act like Chicken Little. The book tells this heartbreaking story of a guy named Richard who had a phenomenal real estate deal lined up in Phoenix. He found a little townhouse, ran the numbers, and it would generate great positive cash flow every month. It was a textbook asset. But he backs out at the very last minute. Why? Because he told his friends about it at a barbecue, and they warned him against it, quoting all these doom and gloom macroeconomic statistics they heard on the news. They planted doubt. He let the noise of the cynics kill his opportunity.
And the classic cynic excuse in real estate, the phrase that stops millions of people from investing, is, "I don't want to fix toilets at midnight." How many times have we heard that? But a smart investor analyzes the situation rather than just criticizing it. A smart investor looks at the toilet problem and says, "I don't want to fix toilets either, so I'll structure the deal to include the cost of hiring a great property manager to do it for me." The cynic's complaint blinds them to the opportunity entirely. They use the toilet as an excuse to stay in their comfort zone.
Obstacle number 3 is laziness. But the book redefines this in a really interesting way. It's not the kind of laziness where you sit on the couch eating potato chips and watching reality TV all day. It's actually the exact opposite.
Yes, the most common, insidious form of laziness is staying constantly busy. People stay frantic at work, They fill their weekends with busy work. They obsess over their kids' schedules, specifically to avoid facing the reality of their deteriorating financial situation or their failing relationships. Deep down, subconsciously, they know they are avoiding the hard, uncomfortable work of learning about money and building wealth, so they hide behind their busyness to look productive.
And the cure for this specific kind of laziness is highly controversial. The book suggests you need a little bit of guilt-free greed. We are raised to believe that greed is inherently evil. But Rich Dad says you have to tune into the radio station, WIIFM, What's in it for me. You have to allow yourself to desire freedom, to desire a better life, enough to break the lazy habit of just staying busy. You have to want it.
Which leads perfectly into obstacle number 4, bad habits. And this introduces one of the most famous fundamental concepts in personal finance, originating from the classic book, The Richest Man in Babylon. Pay yourself first.
Okay, I have to push back deeply on this one because Robert tells a story about implementing pay yourself first that genuinely gives me anxiety just reading it. He talks about times early in his career when his cash flow was short, he didn't have enough money to pay his monthly bills, and his bookkeeper was literally screaming at him in panic, "The IRS is going to put you in jail. The electric company is going to shut off the power. The suppliers are going to sue you." But Robert still took his money and put it into his asset column first before paying a single creditor. What happens when the bill collectors call? You can't just ignore reality.
It sounds incredibly irresponsible, almost reckless on the surface. But the expert analysis here requires understanding the psychology behind the 96-pound weekly analogy Kiyosaki uses.
Right, he's referencing those old vintage comic book ads where the muscular bully kicks sand in the face of the skinny weakling at the beach.
Exactly. Rich Dad explained that bill collectors, credit card companies, and the government are financial bullies. They use intimidation and fear. Most people, the 96-pound weaklings, pay the bullies first to avoid the confrontation. And if there's nothing left over at the end of the month, they shrug and pay themselves nothing. They let the bully kick sand in their face, so they remain financially weak forever. But if you pay yourself first, forcing money into your reservoirs, your asset column, what happens? The bully starts screaming.
The pressure builds.
The pressure builds immensely, and the genius of the strategy is that you use that immense pressure, that visceral fear of the creditors, to motivate your internal financial genius. The panic forces you to go out and hustle. You have to create a new income stream, you have to sell something, you have to figure out a way to make more money, to pay the bills. The pressure acts like heavy weights in a mental gym, building your financial muscles. If you pay them first and yourself last, you feel no pressure, you sleep soundly, but you end up broke and weak.
It's an absolute high-wire act. It requires nerves of steel, but the logic of using pressure to force innovation is undeniably powerful. And the final obstacle, number 5, is arrogance. The book defines arrogance simply as ego plus ignorance. People use bluster and loud opinions to hide what they don't know about money. When you encounter a financial topic you don't understand, don't bluff. Find an expert, buy a book, humble yourself, and learn.
So, with the mindset shifted, the definitions of assets and liabilities firmly established, and the psychological obstacles cleared, we finally arrive at the ultimate practical question for the listener.
The question everyone asks after reading this. So, practically, how do I actually get started?
Kiyosaki doesn't just leave you with theory. He provides 10 specific, actionable steps to awaken your financial genius, and we need to explore how to actually apply these, not just list them.
Let's dive in. Step 1. You need a reason greater than reality. This is the power of spirit. If you just casually say, "I want to be rich," the very first time you hit a roadblock, the first time a tenant doesn't pay rent or a stock drops, you'll quit. The math isn't enough. You need deep, visceral, emotional wants and don't wants. For example, I don't want to work in a cubicle taking orders from a boss I hate for the next 40 years, and I want to be able to travel the world while I'm young and healthy. That emotional fuel is the only thing that gets you through the hard times.
It's the engine of the whole machine. Step 2, invest in education first. This is acknowledging that your mind is your single most important, most powerful asset. Before you go out and throw money at stocks, before you try to buy a piece of real estate, buy a book. Go to a seminar. Listen to deep dives like this one. The masses use their disposable income to buy big screen TVs and new cars. The wealthy use their disposable income to buy education.
Step 3, choose friends carefully. This is the incredible power of association. We become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. If your friends are all poor, frightened chicken littles who constantly talk about how bad the economy is, that will become your reality. You have to intentionally seek out friends who talk about money, business and investing. You want friends who have inside information, who know where the next technological or real estate wave is forming, so you can surf it with them.
Step 4, master a formula and then learn a new one. In today's rapidly changing world, it's not what you currently know that matters, it's how fast you can learn something new. Most people only ever learn one formula. Work hard for a paycheck. You have to expand your repertoire. Maybe you spend a year learning the formula for buying foreclosures. You master it, it generates cash flow. Then you move on. You learn the formula for trading options.
Let's pause and define trading options because it sounds intimidating. An option is simply a contract that gives you the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell an asset at a specific price within a specific time frame. It allows you to control massive amounts of stock or real estate with a very small amount of cash. It's a high leverage tool. Once you learn that formula, you add it to your toolbox. Then you learn how to buy distressed businesses. You just keep stacking formulas.
Step 5, pay yourself first. We just covered the psychology of this with the 96-pound weakling. But mechanically, it is the ultimate test of self-discipline. If you visualize those plumbing pipes, it means physically forcing the water into the reservoir before it even reaches the main house where the leaks are. Automate your investment so the money is gone before you can even think about spending it on a doodad.
Step 6, pay your brokers well. I think a lot of people struggle with this one. Society tells us to cut out the middleman, use discount online brokers, sell your house by yourself to save the 3% commission. But Kiyosaki argues that good professionals, smart accountants, sharp real estate agents, savvy stockbrokers make you money. If a broker is making a massive commission, it means they are making you a massive profit. You are paying for their education and their network. Don't be cheap with the people who guard your assets.
Step 7, be an Indian giver. The book uses this historical phrase to talk about the primary metric of investing, return on investment, or ROI. When you put your hard-earned capital into an asset, the very first question a sophisticated investor asks is, how fast do I get my initial money back? And the second question is, what asset do I get to keep for free once I pull my original capital out? You want investments that pay you back quickly, allowing you to move that same capital into the next deal while leaving you with a free, income-generating asset from the first deal.
Step 8, assets buy luxuries. This is the ultimate lesson in delayed gratification and focus.
Oh, the story of the teenager and the car is the perfect illustration of this step.
I love this story. It's such a brilliant parenting hack. A friend of Robert's has a 16-year-old son who desperately wants a car. All the kids' friends are getting cars bought for them by their parents. The son is begging. But the father refuses to just buy a liability. Instead, he gives his son $3,000 in cash. But he sets a rule. He says you cannot use this to buy a car. You have to open a brokerage account and use this to trade stocks. Once you use your financial intelligence to turn this $3,000 into $6,000, you can use the $3,000 profit to buy your car, and the original $3,000 goes into your college fund.
It's brilliant because it harnesses the emotion of desire we talked about earlier, but points it in a productive direction.
Exactly. The kid lost money at first. He got frustrated. But his desire for the car was so strong, he started reading the Wall Street Journal. He started studying companies. He eventually hit a winning streak and made money. He got the luxury, but more importantly, he used his desire for a doodad to build his financial intelligence. The asset bought the luxury.
Step 9, the need for heroes. This is about mental models. When you were a kid playing baseball in the backyard, you didn't just swing the bat. You pretended to be Willie Mays or Babe Ruth. Emulating your idols makes the difficult things look easy. When Kiyosaki is negotiating a massive, intimidating real estate deal, he mentally steps out of his own shoes and asks himself, what would Donald Trump do in this negotiation? What would Warren Buffett look for in this prospectus? Borrowing the bravado and mindset of your heroes can get you past your own limiting beliefs.
And finally, step 10, teach and you shall receive. The incredible power of giving. If you feel short on money, time, or love, the counterintuitive secret is to give it away first. The text notes that Rich Dad always tithed and gave to charity even when he was broke. Poor Dad always said he would give to charity when he finally had some extra money, but because of the rat race, there was never any extra. Giving opens the floodgates to receive. If you want to learn about money, teach someone else what you know, and you'll find your own understanding deepens exponentially.
These 10 steps are the tactical execution of everything we've explored today. They take the philosophy and turn it into motion. And this brings us to the final epilogue story of the book, which perfectly ties all this theory into one concrete, real-world example.
The $7,000 college fund. This story circles all the way back to the panic Sharon Lechter felt at the very beginning of the book regarding her son's future.
Right. A friend of Robert's was agonizing over how to pay for his 4 children to go to college. He ran the numbers and realized he needed to save roughly $400,000. He was trying to save it out of his monthly paycheck, which is the hard way. He was trying to fill a swimming pool with a leaky bucket. Robert showed him how to use financial intelligence instead. The friend did his research, found a severely undervalued property in Phoenix, and bought it using only $7,000 of his own money as a down payment. He rented it out, and the rental income covered the mortgage and expenses. Eventually, the real estate market turned upwards. The property appreciated massively, and he planned to use the equity and the ongoing cash flow from that single leveraged asset to fund the educations. He used his mind, his financial x-ray, not just his back, to solve a $400,000 problem with $7,000.
So we have to ask the ultimate question. What does this all mean? Why does this specific book, published decades ago, matter so deeply to you listening right now? If we look at the big picture, it matters because the world is changing faster than it ever has in human history. We are long past the industrial age. Relying on antiquated advice, go to school, get a safe job, rely on a pension, buy a big house, and call it an investment is quite literally a recipe for a life of fear and financial struggle. Anyone who feels stuck in that rat race, anyone who is kept awake at night overwhelmed by a stack of bills, or anyone who is just insanely curious about how the wealthy actually operate and shield their money, well, this book provides the new diagnostic tool. It hands you the mirror.
It demands that you stop acting like a victim of the economy and take absolute responsibility for your own financial education, because the school system simply will not do it for you.
Exactly. And if you found yourself having those aha moments today, if your brain was doing some heavy lifting in the mental gym and you felt those old paradigms shifting and you want to keep expanding your mind, make sure you hit that subscribe button to the Book Nook so you never miss an episode.
We are constantly exploring the concepts that challenge the status quo and help you build a stronger foundation.
And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. We talked a lot today about how the master plan of the industrial age school job pension became a trap for the middle class. But look around us today. We are deep into the information age, the AI age. Are we blindly walking into a new rat race, a digital one? Instead of trading our physical labor for a paycheck, are we trading our attention, our data, and our digital identities for the illusion of convenience and social status? Are we just pulling a high-tech cart for a new set of owners? Take a look at your own digital cash flow this week and start asking, how can I afford my freedom? See you next time.